Great. So, good morning once again, everyone. Welcome to another animation class. So, let's have a basic revision of what we did so far in our last class. The last class, we looked at Objective 1. What are some terms that we need to take note of for animation and game design? We have animation, we have game design, and some additional terms we were looking at. Anybody remember what is animation? You can put it in your own words. Will you remember the nutshell?
Process of making or developing video like things, something like that. Alright. The process of developing, what I should say, a video using pictures and so on.
But there's some keywords you need to take note of. Some keywords you need to remember. That when it comes to animation, how are they grouped together? Or how are these images grouped together? What is the pattern with your grouping?
Sequence.
They're in a sequence. Right, they're in a sequence. And that sequence is supposed to have an order, or you can say a natural flow. So it's not just random, we are putting images together or drawings or whatever we're going to put together to make this animation. It must have an order, it must have a sequence, one scene after the other. And when they're placed together, they give us what? The perception of what? When we look at animation, what do we perceive?
Motion?
Motion or movement. That's what we perceive when we look at animation. Very good. So those are some keywords you need to remember. Whatever we are grouping together, whether it's images, drawings, real life objects, whatever the case may be, it must have some sort of sequence so that when it is grouped together, when it's placed one after each other, it gives us that illusion of movement or motion, however you want to phrase it. Good. What is game design?
Game design is the creation of games whereby it can be educational or entertainment or used for entertainment purposes.
Good. And what goes into the creation of games? What aspects are there?
Characters.
Developing characters, good. Background, good.
Animation could be included.
Animation. Well, basically, you could break it down and say like the storyboard or the scenario, and animation. Good. Just that you had the right idea, but you could have it's just the right word you were looking for. So the storyline, the storyboard, the environment, the characters, designing all of those things, getting all those concepts. Remember all those drawings, all of those backgrounds, they are concepts. And we need to get some idea, we need to get creative ideas as to how we are going to generate those concepts. So all of that is a part of game design. Good. And then there were some additional terms. So that we looked at. So today we're going to look at objective 2, and we are going to, what is the objective? To outline the history and present use of animation and game design. So how did persons carry out animation and game design in the past, and what are they doing today? What are they doing presently? And basically we can also add in what is going to happen in the future, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. What might be the next biggest thing to design? So what is the history of animation? What is the history of game design? And what are we currently doing? So Zain,
Yes, sir.
you can start researching what is the history of animation.
Okay.
We can do the same. Google that once again. Ariel,
Yes, sir.
you are doing the history of game design.
Okay.
Alia,
Yes, sir.
you are looking at what is current today. What are we doing today?
What is current? Okay.
So this is going to be AGD U1 M1 O2 objective 2. So history of animation. So remember we looked at what was the definition of both of them. What is animation? So we're looking at how persons would have designed animation, how they would have created animation, and so on. That's our main goal. Same for game design. What is the process they use to design? What is the process they use to create? Come up with ideas, all of those things. So that's basically what you are looking for. Anyone with the link can edit, copy the link. Link is in the chat. Review these materials. So we can look at things like where or how did animation start? Where or how did game design start? That's going to be part of the history.
I don't feel like using situation. Is there another word that can go in that place?
You could research Sure, it's like what is the current,
Trend?
yeah, with animation design, the current trend with game design and so on. And that's basically what you're looking at. Our practices, trends.
So I'm finding things, right? But it's a lot.
Yeah, gonna be a lot. So let's pick who you think is the most appropriate we can work with,
Okay, great.
and you add. You can brush over it a little, see if it makes sense, and then you add it in, and then we can go through it and see if it really does, if you can work with it. What you guys can do, the you can just extract a small part of it, like what Zane would have done. Just extract a small part, and the rest we can go through the link. Ensure you put your link. Because I'm gonna go through back everything using your link to create the final notes basically. But this is gonna take some research time and so on. Ariel, I'm not seeing you adding anything. Are we still reading?
I'm reading, but I'm just gonna put in the first part. If anyone get a chance to go through it, it's very detailed. It got everything. So yeah.
Okay. Alright, good. So Zayn and Ariel, we have enough information on the history of animation and history of game design. So I think our focus now should be on the current situation. So Zayn, since you were looking at animation, look at what are we doing currently for animation design.
Okay.
And Ariel, you do the same also. What are we doing for currently for game design? And we add some content in that part, and then we can go through everything.
Do we have to type it or share it with you?
I put it in the document. There's a section for the current situation. You put there's you can notice there's a section for animation. Make that heading 2, and there's a section for game design. Make that heading 2 also. So I'm sure you put it under those sections on the current design, current situation. Alright, 2 more minutes, and then we can start going through. can give you guys 2 more minutes to add some more content for the current situation. Ensure you put a link so let me know where you get the information from. Hopefully this afternoon I'm going to finalize objective 1 and objective 2. I'm going to put that in the classroom. Basically, whatever I put in the classroom, I think that's going to be a final version. Alright, 1 more minute. Alright, good. So there's a pause for our research. So let's look at the content now. So look at your Google Doc. Ensure you would have put out your link so that we can go through it. Good. So first we're going to start with the history of animation. So let's look at the first link. The animation from the Latin anima, the soul. It means empathy or some kind of reanimation. So from this definition here, or from this origin definition, anybody could wanna give an explanation as to why they would have described it that way. The soul, it means empathy or some kind of reanimation. What do you think?
Sir, my guess is like back then in like the Latin ages, they used that definition because when like someone died, they would put a drawing or like some kind of remembrance symbol on an item, so remember or signify something that a person did.
Okay, good. But think of it in terms of animation now.
So in that sense, it'd be like bringing the images to life.
Exactly. That's it. Exactly. So remember, it's animation is about that still image, that drawing or whatever you're gonna use, and when we animate it, it's like if we're bringing it back to life. It's going to have like a reanimation. We're gonna perceive it as though it is moving. Cartoons, animation, cartoon movies, animated films, kind of cinematographic art which created by time-lapse photography of successive phases of the drawings, graphic or painted animation, or volume or puppet animation objects. Animators create the art of animation. The first attempts to capture the movement in the figures refer to the Paleolithic cave paintings, where animals are depicted with multiple legs overlapping each other. In Shahir Sukte, Iran, was found an earthen jar whose age is estimated to be 5,000 years old. On the walls of the vessel made kids, five pictures, kids on the move. Where is that? Good. So going back to this Paleolithic cave paintings here, where animals are depicted with multiple legs overlapping each other. This is one way those older persons would have animated. They use the same drawing. So I'm not seeing it here, but what they would have done is to use the same animal, and when they wanted to perceive movement in the animal, they would have added multiple legs onto the animal. So basically they would have added a leg, the pair of legs at the back would have been maybe in one direction, and the direction to perceive it moving into, they would move the leg into that direction. They would draw the leg into that direction. So if you were to actually draw that, wrong software, paint. So if you were to draw that, how would you draw? So there's the head, there's the back, there's the body. So this is smiling. So if we were to draw the legs come down that way, both legs, and then they draw it something like that. But it would have different shades to indicate like movement from basically going right to left. That's how they would have animated that in the past. With this earthen jar, 5,000 years old, on the walls of vessel made 5 picture kids on the move. I'm wondering if it's this one here. 2000 BC, first example of animation. So basically they would have drawn one image after each other. And that's how they would have animated. And it's kind of like how we do things today too. We draw one image after each other. So here, 5,000 years ago, 5 images, goat in motion. Okay, good. So it's a drawing of one image after each other. The goat on the ground, the goat slightly in the air. The third image, he's much higher. Fourth image, he came down, and he's just jumping. And it's just one image after each other. 5 images in motion. Oh, so this way the cup now. So if you were to rotate this cup now, that would even give it a more perception of movement, because the cup will be moving, the images will be moving also along with the cup. So I'm assuming these strokes here, these smaller strokes, because you need a way to differentiate. They would have needed a way to differentiate, or maybe even how they would have positioned the legs itself. That would have given the perception of movement. But so we have an idea as to how they would have design animation. So in Egypt, there were found drawings which refer to 2000 year BC. There was an idea to name these drawings as the examples of first animation, but at that time didn't exist special equipment which could show the drawings in motion. History of animation started on the 20th of July 1887 in France. Charles Emile Reynaud, self-taught engineer, created and presented the first prasinoscope on 28th of October 1892. He projected the first animated film in public, Pauvre Pierrot, at the Musée Gravin in Paris. This film is also notable as the first known instance of film perforations being used. So his animation, 19. Alright, let me look at the early one. Okay, so this is a prasinoscope. Let me see if you're pronouncing that correctly. Prasinoscope.
Praxinoscope.
Alright, so everyone saw how the prasinoscope function?
Yep.
Good. So look at Emil Reynaud, the cartoon, the patient period. Let's skip to the scene and see how we would have animated that. Good. So, based on those two videos there, what is the key factor in those two videos to make it an animation?
Visuals or something.
Visuals. We looked at it when we were discussing the definition.
Drawings.
No. What is the key factor that was needed to make it an animation?
Oh, sequence.
Sequence or more importantly, Ali and Zain.
So they had like multiple pictures in succession.
Good, right. But They had multiple pictures in succession, but what is the key factor that made them an animation, that made these videos an animation?
Motion.
The motion. That is the key factor here. The motion. Because if you look back at this paragraph here, that's why I told you guys to remember the videos. In Egypt, they were found drawings which refer to 2000 year BC. Now this is 2000 year BC. This is 1877. There was an idea to name these drawings as examples of first animation, but it didn't. Why? But at that time, it didn't exist special equipment which it could show the drawings in motion. So even though they were drawings, if you look back at this drawing here, or more specifically this one here, so this one is more perceivable. Even though we are looking at each image, and we can see there's movement in the different sequences of images. We can see the movement of the goat. But the issue with this here now is that there wasn't any technology, or there wasn't anything moving the images for us to actually perceive movement. So that's the key factor with animation. It needs something to go between each scene, or between each drawing or image. Something needs to move those images. So that's why I would have said that the cup could actually work, because if you were to spin the cup now, then that would have caused the images to move. So technically here, 5,000 years ago, if they were to put this cup on a spindle, not sure if they would have did that, but I would think more than likely they would have done that in the past. They put it on a spindle, and if they were to spin this cup, they would have created motion with the cup, and that would have caused the images to move, which would have caused the goats to actually be perceived as moving. But then the other issue with that now is that if they spin it too fast, they won't actually perceive the movement. If they spin it too slow also, so the speed also comes into play. So when the speed of spinning that cup comes into play, what are we talking about there?
Transition or something? Like a modern day you're talking about?
No,
What it would be called?
in general for animation, when we're talking about how fast we're going between images in animation.
FFP? This is on
FPS.
FPS. Ah, yes. That.
So frames per second. So
Yeah.
that's what I was talking about. If they were to spin this cup, and if they were to spin it at a very fast rate, then you won't be able to perceive any image. Why? Because the frame per second would be so high that you won't be able to perceive anything, and because there's so few images, you won't be able to perceive anything. So they would have to figure out, if they were actually spinning the cup, how fast can I spin the actual cup in order to get a perception of animation. So this is another way how we can say the frames per second comes into play when we are looking at animation. Are we going to say 1 frame per second? Because if when you look at this video here, tell me how many frames per second. Just a rough you think it is.
I honestly don't know.
about 6. Alia, what do you see?
I think 6 to 8. I don't know if it's me, but this ain't glitching. But yeah, 6 to 8.
I see.
Okay. Well, I would have actually say fewer because remember I'm seeing the actual quality. So you guys can check it on your end. I would say I'm seeing about 3, 4, sometimes even 1 or 2 frames per second. Actually depends on the scene. There's different amounts. There wasn't a standard like they were actually following. So um, let me cover this issue of frames per second so that everybody could be on the same page. Good. So when it comes to animation, the first thing we need to remember, what is the most important factor when it comes to animation? It's the third time I'm asking this question.
Yes, and third time I'm gonna say sequence.
And the third time I'm going to say no.
No,
The most important factor,
the most important
Motion.
the motion, the movement, because we need to perceive movement, we need to perceive motion, we need to perceive that the object is moving, the person is moving. That's the most important factor. So, because yes, you can have sequence, but if the sequence is not good enough, then if it's not in the correct order, or if it's not enough in that correct order, then we cannot perceive movement. So that's the most important factor we need to perceive movement in order to say it is animation. How will we be able to perceive movement? Well, it all comes down to frames per second. How many frames in a second will be in this animation so that we can get the perception of movement. Now, when we say frame, what other words can we interchange the word frame with?
Your own pictures,
Pictures,
drawing.
a scene.
drawing, scene, very good. So pictures, drawing, scenes, however you want to phrase it, however you want to imagine it. It's what is appearing on the screen. That is the frame. Whatever is appearing on the screen, that is the frame. But remember, when time moves, the smallest measurement in time that we consider is what? The smallest measurement in time that we consider.
Millisecond.
Do you consider millisecond?
No, a second.
A
Just one
second, good.
second.
So realistically, when you're looking at the time, you count seconds. That's the smallest unit we just consider as humans. Anything lower than that, we consider that when we're looking at computers and things that move in more fast and so on. But when we're looking at actual time, the smallest unit we look at is second. So that's why we have second here. Because we can perceive second. We cannot perceive millisecond because remember, second goes so fast that sometimes we miss it. So, but we can actually perceive seconds. We can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 seconds already passed here. So, what we're looking at frames per second, it's how many images, how many drawings, how many scenes can appear in this second that we can perceive. How many drawings, how many frames, how many images appear in 1 second, because we can perceive a second. We can tell a second apart from another second. We can actually count seconds, so we can perceive it. You guys following?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
So remember, Ariel, this is mostly for you. So if you start going technical, you're not
Thanks.
following, you let me know. So you following so far?
Yep.
Good. So your frame per second is very simple. It's how many frames appear in a second. So most games today, they aim for 60 frames per second. Now, when they say 60 frames per second, what do they mean?
Like 60 image in a second or something.
Exactly that. 60 images are going to appear in 1 second. Remember, this is about seconds, not minutes, not anything else, not milliseconds, anything else. It's talking only about seconds. So it doesn't matter if you add 160 in front here, it is still talking about seconds. It's still referring to seconds. So whatever number is in front there, it's how many images are going to appear in this 1 second. Following so far?
Yep.
I think now we can start getting more technical. So this actually goes back to what we learned in the last class, where we were talking about the persistence of vision. I basically said that so now we can talk about the millisecond now. In 40 millisecond, which is basically 0.04 of a second. From a second is 1, so that 1 would have been out here. So 0.04 is all we need to see an image, and we are going to remember that image. So in 40 milliseconds, or 0.04 of a second, we just need to see an image, and we remember that image. You guys following there?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Ariel was a no?
Yes, yes.
Yes, it was a no?
No, I'm following.
Good. So 0.04 of a second. So we will put the word second here. In 0.04 of a second, we can see an image, and we perceive we can remember that image. So if you were to compare that to 1 second now, so we're looking at 0.04 second and 1 second. So divide 1 by 0.04 and tell me how much you get.
Zero 0.04 by 1 second.
Yes, or 1 divided by 0.04. How many times can 0.04 go into 1?
0.04 times.
So the question is to divide 1 by 0.04. You have a calculator, don't use your head.
25.
25.
I don't know. The first, when I do 0.04 divided by 1, I got 0.04. But I'm going to do 1 divided by 0.04.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking for. So 1
I'm going 25.
25.
25, yeah.
Good, 25. So I guess there's more here at the end. There's supposed to be more numbers at the end here. So 0.01 divided by 0.041. I guess it gotta be a slightly larger number than that. Good. The main thing we're looking at is that, well, it's supposed to be more numbers at the end here. And when you divide that 1 by 0.04, you're going to end up with the number 24, basically. Now, why are we ending up with that number 24? Is because Remember we said that we basically need to see an image for 0.04 second and we're going to remember it. Now 0.04 we need to cover a second because remember a second needs to pass. Time continuously goes on. So what's going to happen with the rest of time? So we need to complete that 1 second because remember in frames per second we are looking at a second. So we need to complete the rest of time, the rest of, so that can be 0.04, so that's going to be 9.6. So that can be a difference of 9.6. 96. If you add these two together, you get 1 second, right? You guys following?
Yep.
Yeah.
So what we're saying is that you need to see an image for 0.04 second. We're going to remember it, but frames per second uses a second. So we have to complete that entire second. We have to use up all the time in that 1 second. So that's going to be a difference of 9.6. So that rest of time now we have to find something to take up that space. So that's why we divided the 1 by the 0.4 and we get 24. So what that means it is that it is basically 0.04 appearing 24 times. So once that is appearing 24 times, it means that we need 24 images, 24 drawings in 1 second in order for us to perceive actual movement, a smooth movement. Because if we go back to this video here, what did Alias say about the video?
It's sticking.
Right, it's sticking, it was choppy. Because you could actually perceive the movement from one image after the other. You were seeing the different scenes. And that's why was that the case?
Sir, because there were like little frames per second.
Exactly. Because there was a smaller number of frames per second. That's why you were perceiving the changes in the actual frame. So when you want an animations to be smooth, what do you need?
A larger frames per second.
Exactly. You need a larger frame per second. So going back to this calculation here, 24 frames per second is basically the standard. That's basically the lowest number of frames per second we need to perceive a smooth flow of images, to perceive animation. So movies, videos today, they actually are recorded in 24 frames per second. Some do 30. That is the standard of what is used today. Now, when you want to go even smoother, when you want to have an even better quality animation, that is why you would go higher. You'd go 60 frames per second, 120, 144, 180, and so on. That is why games want that higher frame per second. Not games, gamers want that higher frame per second. Because when you're playing a game, remember you're constantly fixated on this screen and you can perceive the movement. You would be able to more perceive any choppiness or changes in the frame. So when you move that gun, you move the mouse to move the gun in the screen. If the frame per second is so low, you're going to see it jump in. And you might not aim in the correct direction or to the correct target. But if it is higher, then the animation is going to be much smoother, so you could move whatever object in the game more naturally. And that way now, they'll be able to basically play the game a lot easier, a lot better. So that's actually why gamers are calling for higher frame per second. But you guys get the overall idea?
Yes, yes, we do.
Sí, señor.
Okay. So hopefully in the future there isn't any more confusion about frames per second. So frames per second, in a nutshell, it's how many images, drawings, scenes are appearing in 1 second. The lower, the more choppy, the more we're gonna notice the different changes. The higher, the smoother. And but that doesn't mean everything needs higher frame per second, because some animations, some animators, they want that choppiness. They want persons to perceive that different changes in the images. For example, we looked at, yes, in the last class we looked at stop motion animation. For stop motion animation, it's not supposed to be smooth. You're supposed to be able to perceive one scene after each other. You're supposed to be able to see basically the stop in the different motion. And if we look back at the definition we had on frame rate, notice here in animation for film, the typical frame rate is 24 frames per second. Since most traditional animation is done in twos, but that's why we were talking about that twos part. So when something is 24 frames per second, that means we need 24 images in this 1 second, correct?
Sí, señor.
If something is 60 frames per second, we need 60 images. If something is 120 images frames per second, we need 120 images per second. Now, that is not going to be something difficult for a computer, because remember, the computer creating the images. So it's not like if we can tire out the computer. But when it comes to humans now, we can't tire that person out. So if you're gonna manually create an animation and you're gonna want to create your animation at 60 frames per second, anybody get the idea of where I'm going so far? What are you gonna have to do? Or what will you be doing if you wanted to create an animation with 60 frames per second?
It'll be more time consuming.
Right? And basically every second for that animation you have to draw 60 images
Oh, true.
1 second. So do you think you guys would do that?
No.
If it depends on the project.
But realistically, a person, they won't really do that. Um, they won't even go so high, because remember, all we need is 24 frames per second, and that's all we need to really perceive movement. So that's the least they would go. They would draw 24 images, put it in a second. But what some persons started doing is that they used the images in twos. That would have reduced the workload. So when they say they are doing the animation in twos, it basically means that instead of using one image for 1 second, they are now using one image for 2 seconds. So all they're gonna have to do for that 1 second, that 24 frames per second, is to draw 12 images. And they just raise the duration of each image to 2 seconds. So that way now they are reducing their workload. You guys follow it?
So basically, like, say I have this first picture, the first picture going back to like, you like copy it and use it for the second picture, and then use another picture.
Exactly.
So it's basically two until you get the 24.
Exactly. So it's still the 24 frames per second, Because remember, we still need to complete that 24 images, and we need it to last for a second. So we're gonna even if we use 12 images, remember, if we go back to our calculation, even if we use 12, we're gonna end up with half of this second. We're gonna end up with 0.50. So what's gonna happen with the rest of time? We need something to take up the space in that rest of time. So what's going to take up the space is the additional image. But I think I get the idea of what you're getting at. It's not that you would need to copy it. Most programs today, when you're doing animation, you just tell it how many frames per second, and it will do the adjusting basically to how long it needs to last within that second in order for you to get that 24 frames per second, to be doing it in twos and so on. But we're just looking at it from the technical aspect. How is it actually working in the background? But realistically, when you are going to be designing, the first thing they're going to ask you is how many frames per second are you going to use? If it is 12 frames per second, if it's 24, if it's 30, and so on. And the program is going to do the calculation. They're going to do everything that we are discussing right now in the background. Any questions?
No, sir.
Sir, is there ever a case where you would go to like, you know how there's twos? Like, would there ever be a case you do an animation in trees?
Yes, that is possible. Because remember I mentioned that not all animation needs to be smooth. Some animators, some animations, they look good when they are choppy, when they are moving, especially the stop motion animation. Because if stop motion was smooth, then basically that's a video. But when it is choppy now, when you're seeing that different movements and that random movements within it, it adds to the appeal of the content. So if we look back at stop motion, well, you could say some looks as though it is moving smoothly, but some parts you can literally see the different changes in the scene, and that is because they would have used multiple frames, basically longer, so that they get this stop motion animation. If you were let me look at frame rate for stop motion animation, 24 frames per second. It's supposed to be lower, but you can get away with a little as 8 frames per second. So 24 to 8 frames per second, depending on how basically you want the choppiness to be between the frames. 15 frames per second, yeah, that sounds more right. However, simple marketing videos you would put on social media, you can stick with 15 frames per second of screen time to create smooth enough look. Well, that's if you want it to be smooth enough. But if you want it to be a little more cutty in between, then you can go even lower. And if you were to do the actual calculation, where's my calculator? So say a 1 second, we use 15 seconds, so 1 divided by 15. Our image has to appear for 0.06. I remember we're looking at 0.04. So let me see, if we go higher, 1 divided by 24. Okay, so if we go lower now, 1 divided by 8, so we go by the lowest. 0.15. So basically image needs to, if we wanted 8 frames per second, image needs to last 0.125. And if we were to divide that now by the 0.04, image needs to last for 3 of that 0.04. So that's, in that case now, the image is going to be in threes. So it all depends on what is your need. Do you want the animation to be smooth or do you want it to be choppy? That's going to determine how many frames per second you would basically need.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Understood. No.
You following Ariel?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay. It's I'll, it's you we could say that there's some calculations to it, but it's some simple calculations. One, you understand the fundamental that it is measured in second, the second that we can perceive, a 1 second, and within that second, it's basically how many images appear in a second. 24, 60, 120, and you just divide 1 by whatever that number is. If it's 120, then whatever number you get here, that's basically how long the image is going to last for. So in this case here, 120 frames per second, the image is going to last for 8 milliseconds, or 0.08 of a second. And in order to get that perception, remember the persistence of vision, 0.04. Well, this is much, when you go that low, how does it affect? So I guess now, when you go high, you can also say that how you're going beyond the persistence of vision. You don't remember things.
It's going to be too fast.
Yeah, basically, it's going to be too fast for you to perceive. So that's why persons, they counteract the high frame rate battle. That persons want high frame rate, they counteract it because they say now it is too fast for our eyes to perceive, and we can actually see it with the calculation here. It is too fast for our eyes to perceive, so we won't be able to perceive it, to remember it. So it doesn't really make sense that we have such high frame rates. But it all depends on the need. It all depends on the person, because some persons, they, when they're playing games for so long, they would be able to perceive it, but to a normal everyday person, they won't be able to do so because their eyes aren't accustomed to those high speed changes. Yes, so that's a detailed explanation of frames per second. What are we looking at? Alright, so we're way beyond our scheduled time. So we're gonna stop here at
History of animation.
the history of animation. I think, okay, there's a few more content inside of it. So the next class we can continue to go through it, and hopefully we get to start the history of game design.
Avatar.
If you guys don't have any questions, we shall end here for today.
Okay, goodbye.
Remember to save your copy.
Adios.
Or just leave it as an open tab there for months. Either one works.
And then accidentally close it.
No, it's always in the history.
Wait, so Ariel,